Hey! Here I am, Doug Brown with Method Airwaves, episode number 8, which is titled Layton Elementary. This is where I went to school as a little guy, from kindergarten all the way through 6th grade, which were the years 1979 to 1986. My whole childhood, boom, right there. Layton Elementary. Why not do a little tribute? Past few podcasts have been kind of sentimental and looking back and sharing my life and my story, and hopefully you folks can relate to it because I know you've been there, gone through it, or going through it. So, without further ado, where to begin on this one? Layton, Worcester, Ohio, where I grew up. I was born in Columbus, however. A real quick story. My parents, they hail from Mount Gilead, Ohio, which I call Mount G. Kind of a farm, small town, all Americana. I talk a lot about it in my past podcasts. But my parents, high school sweethearts, making a long story short, fell in love. Dad went to college and grad school. Mom, she went to nursing school, later on became a realtor. But through that time, let's see, they went from Mount Gilead to Columbus, and then they went out to Nebraska for a while because of my father and his job and what he was doing. But they came back, and where did they come? To the town of Worcester, Ohio. My dad had heard from a friend about this community, how it was nice, it was small, and he fell in love, and he got a job here, so he fell in love with that, and we were planted here. Worcester, Ohio. And let's see, grew up on Townsend Drive, which was a cul-de-sac. I have a history here. My whole entire life, I've grown up on cul-de-sacs, on circles, which is kind of cool. No traffic. It's a playground right in front on the cement, but no traffic. So after Townsend, they moved to Avalon Drive in the town of Worcester, Ohio. That's where I grew up. And about a mile up the road was this glorious grade school called Layton Elementary. Layton Elementary is a lot of history. It was built in 1949 and closed in 2005. And afterwards, what happened? It became a Montessori school, I believe, and then a LEAP program school, and I think it closed for a while. Then it became used for an art type center that put on plays, and I think it's a church now, so it's gone through a lot. And I was in Layton the last time was probably 5 or 6 years ago. Now, I was filming a skate video for a sponsor, and it was when the school was going through some renovation of some kind. So I figured it was safe to film there. Now, as I show up, I'm filming, I'm putting my board together. Some guy comes out, and he says, "Hey, are you Doug Brown?" This whole spiel. And I'm like, "Yeah, man." And he said his son was a fan and that he wanted a picture of me. I said, "All right, no problem." However, I made him a deal. I said, "Let's do a picture, but let me go inside of Layton. Let me walk around and take a look." So he said, "Hey, sure thing." So that's what happened. And I went in there with my camera and took some shots, and I got to go in Layton again, which was surreal. And it looked exactly the same. It was so cool. I knew exactly where everything was. to be able to stand on that stage again, where I had performed at the talent shows, to go through each classroom. It just, a flood of memories came back. So I was very fortunate to have that experience. The school just had so much diversity in types of people, different economic statuses, different ethnicities. It was a wonderful school to go to for those many years, to be around all that. And it was located at 1859 Burbank Road. So it wasn't uptown and it wasn't downtown. It was like right in the middle. The school is named after C.M. Layton. And on the side of the building, there's a plaque that's still there to this day. And the plaque reads as this: "The trees on the lawn west of this building were given by the friends, the teachers, and the pupils of Worcester City Schools in memory of C.M. Layton, who gave his best to the youth of Worcester, serving as their superintendent from 1932 to November 1940. I couldn't have been more happy to go to that school. That school was awesome. It was old school. It was simple. And it was very diverse. All walks of life were at Layton Elementary. There was approximately 300 students. It was split, 150 boys, 150 girls. And there was me. Before I went to grade school, did some preschool. Yeah, my first preschool I attended. I hope I don't get these reversed. I went to 2 preschools. Because I had this summer birthday, they figured I was too young to go into kindergarten. So my preschools, the first one was called Peppermint Preschool. It was at a church in downtown Worcester. I have lots of memories of that. That's what's crazy about doing this early podcast stuff. I can't tell you what I had for lunch yesterday, but I can tell you every detail from preschool onward through my early years. So after Peppermint Preschool, I then went to the College of Worcester Preschool, which was a trip. I remember a lot of that time. And from that, I was entering kindergarten at good old Layton Elementary. 1979. I was a little guy, 5 or 6, and I was set to start kindergarten. Now, I remember vividly, before school even started, I must have been 3, 4. I remember not really wanting to go. I'm such a homebody. I mean, it's funny looking back how this has followed me through my life, where I'm kind of a homebody and I wasn't thrilled about doing some traditional function. Everybody else, you got to go to school, but in my little brain, I was thinking, well, why? I'm home, I'm enjoying my atmosphere, I'm playing with my toys. I really do remember having some anxiety about going to grade school. And I can remember this. They had 2 classes for kindergarten. They had the morning class and the afternoon class. So essentially, it was a lottery whether you're going to have to get up early or sleep in. And the angels answered my little prayers. Sure enough, I got the afternoon class. I remember being really stoked on that. Rock and roll, because I could sleep in. Even at that age. I mean, through high school, it was torture to get up early. But started way, way, way before. So I start kindergarten. Afternoon classes. My mom would take me. And I'll never forget the first day of school. I was terrified. What little kid isn't? But going there with some anxiety and feeling homesick. I really, really loved the idea of being at home. I vividly remember going to school that day, the first day, and thinking, I had a lump in my throat like I could cry because I wanted to be in my little home environment. So that followed me. My teacher, her name was Mrs. Busick. She was very tall. Now, keep in mind, when you're a little kid, everybody seems tall. A 7th grader seems tall. But she seemed tall. And boy, I remember her. We would watch programs like The Letter People, if you remember that. I always thought that was a cool show. I remember watching that. And the strongest memory I have, got a couple of them, from my kindergarten year. The first one is I got a spanking. That's right. Pants down. Slap. Now, if that happened today, we're talking multi-million-dollar lawsuit, right? Could you imagine that? If a kid went to school, pants down, the teacher slapped him on the butt. Man, that just doesn't happen today. But back in my day, I'm old enough to say that. Yeah. What was I doing? I think I was just being disruptive or talking out loud or something. I don't remember the details of this situation. However, I do remember being embarrassed, being taken to the back of the class. The students turned around. They could see me. She took my pants down. I was facing the opposite way, so my moon, my behind, was towards the class, and she slapped me a few times. Man, that sucked. But I experienced that I was spanked in school by her. Now, it was a different time. She had her credits. She was a good teacher, implemented a lot of good things. I learned a lot that year. Something I remember also from kindergarten was every year the students would get a rock. And it would fit in your hand. It was glossy. I have it right here, right now, in my hand. And it has our school picture. They'd cut it out. And they would like put this glaze on it to cover it so it stayed to the rock. And on the back, I signed it in my name. I tried. Doug, kindergarten, 1979. And I've talked to people in their mid-60s that went to Layton that still have their rock. So if you went to Layton, you've got one of these, which is cool. So yes, there was the spanking incident, but something else I had a problem with. And my parents found this kind of humorous looking back. It is kind of funny. So she taught that year how to tie shoes. Everybody's got to learn to tie your shoes. Now keep in mind, a few years later, Velcro shoes came out. I was stoked on that. But I was also upset that, man, I went through this turmoil, this time where I had to learn to tie my shoes. I couldn't just use these little flaps and Velcro my shoes. No. I had to learn to tie my shoes. Well, everybody did the whole, okay, make the loop-de-loop, wrap around, whatever. I invented my own way to tie shoes, which looks identical to the traditional way. Now, I still tie my shoes like that to this day. But the teacher had an issue with it, and she had told my parents that she thought maybe I was a little bit behind. There was something slow. She had a problem with the fact that I couldn't tie my shoes like everybody else. But my dad, he had my back. Charlie Brown, he was there for me. And he said, hey, look, give the kid some points. He invented his own way. And the shoes actually are tied, and the laces stay. Yes, to this day, if I'm tying some shoes, it's the official Doug Brown method. I wonder if other people do that the way I do. I do remember having some anxiety, though, because I'm like thinking, wow, okay, now when I'm older, I pictured myself in a suit and tie, being a businessman for some reason in this predicament with the shoes. I was thinking, well, do I tie it before when I leave? What if it goes loose? Or I had some nerves about that. So that was kindergarten. Tying shoes. Letter people. Recesses. I remember this classroom. I can remember everything about it. It was very tall. And so was she. Which can segue into the next story, which is I ran into her. She is still alive in the community. And I look at her and she's older, so she might have shrunk a little bit, but I'm like, wow, maybe she wasn't as tall as I thought, because I have grown up. I am now an adult, and I'm standing beside her, and I can look in her eyes. So it's funny how that happens. Now, what's neat about her I randomly was in a neighborhood going to garage sales because I'm thrifty like that. I love flea markets, Goodwills, thrift shops, the works. I randomly go to this garage sale. Oh my goodness, who do I see? Mrs. Busick. There she is. And she remembered me and said I looked the same, and she was tickled. We had a good repertoire and laugh and a bunch of stories. But her grandson, to my surprise, she was thrilled to tell me her grandson was a fan of mine. Like big time. He was into what I was doing, and she was bragging to him, as she says, that I was one of her students. How cool is that? So she has this grandson that's all about me. Flattered. Cool. So I gave her a poster. I signed it to give to him. And I had told her that in my book, my first biography, that I talked all about her. And here we are today on this podcast, speaking of her. So in her garage sale, she actually had some Layton memorabilia because, of course, she retired. And I had bought some things. I bought a pin that said Layton Pride, which I thought was cool. It's a real big thing. So I have that. In fact, it's not too far from me as we speak. So after that year, we're going into first grade. How can I forget first grade? First grade was cool because we're talking 1981 or so. The teacher was Miss Blue. She also seemed tall. Everybody seemed tall. I can't do this for every teacher, can I? So she was tall, but I remember she was new and young, and I think they just hired her. And this was first grade. I still remember exactly where the classroom was. On the left-hand side, down the hall. She was a great teacher. I really liked her. And a lot of things happened that year. I was introduced to reading groups, which they don't do that now. But at the time, they had reading groups and math groups. They have 3 different levels, like, beginner, advanced, whatever. The 3 groups. They would call them by color, of course. It would be the red group, the blue group, the yellow group. But if you're in that lower reading group or math group, you can't help but think, wow, this is a label. This really isn't good to be subjecting children to really separating them in little groups throughout the year. Well, you're in the lowest group, so therefore this is your label, and it kind of sticks. And I remember, I think I was in that lower reading group, and it just sets a tone where you think, oh, geez, does this mean there's something wrong with me and the guy in the next group is smarter than me? That's wrong, because of course that's not true at all. Nevertheless, I was introduced to that. And something else that happened is we had other classes like gym class and art class. Loved gym, loved art. Art teacher was Mrs. Ewald. She was awesome, is awesome. I still see her. My brother graduated with her son, and she was cool. However, I was a creative little guy. Lots of patterns here in my life that continue to this day, I think. Because she would assign something, like we're going to make, I don't know, something out of construction paper and paper plates. Okay, great. Well, everybody's doing that. She tells us what to do. But I always had these creative juices flowing, and I would do something different. Maybe I would take something else off the desk or something in my pencil box and add it to it. And she would say, well, we can't do that. And I was always getting these lectures about that. That's one thing I remember. I was always wanting to expand and do something different. In gym class, I had Mrs. Green. She was cool. She's still around in the community. And she has come up to me and talked about my skateboarding. And it's awesome because she has recognized, and I spoke to her about this, that it's physical fitness and that I became this athlete and I stay active. And she kind of played a part in that. Because these teachers, they would stay, the gym teacher and the art teacher, they would stay throughout all the grades. That's another thing I should add as a bonus here. How fortunate I was that my parents were planted in the community and that I didn't have to move. A lot of people go through that, where they have to change schools, which can be awful for a kid because your whole social network's there and dynamics change and your forced to have a whole new set of friends and go through all that. Through grade school, I had the same group of people. And that was awesome. It was good to have consistency and stability. Change is good, of course, but that would happen with every grade or whatever. And as you get older, you face different challenges. So, back to first grade. Miss Blue. She was awesome. Good teacher. And at Layton, the requirements for school supplies, the beginning of each year, you had to buy school supplies. Fond memories of that, the smell of erasers and pencils. But what's wild is how different it is today for schools than back then. For me, pretty much every year it was exactly the same. All you needed, you needed a box, like a shoebox size thing. They made them in different themes. That would hold all your supplies. And you would need, pencils, scissors, glue, a ruler, and that's pretty much it. And a notebook pad. Today, forget it. Oh my goodness. The requirements now for school supplies are absolutely ridiculous. They want certain types of glue. You need tissues. You need this. I mean, you're racking up $100 a kid. Probably more. And that's just for school supplies. So times have changed. It was nice that we just had our simple little supplies. You'd go to art class and guess what? They had the crayons, they had the supplies. You didn't have to go to Walmart and, stock up on 4 aisles worth of stuff that's frivolous that the school should be supplying. Times have changed. Something unique about the school is it had its own anthem, its own theme song, which was to the tune of Happiness, which I don't remember all the words, but I do remember the melody and the very first part, which is happiness is going to Layton, meeting a teacher, passing a test. Thanks to my friend Mike, my classmate, also. He didn't remember much of it either, but anyways, moving on to second grade. My second grade teacher was Mrs. Alberts. Mrs. Alberts was fun and smiley. And her husband was the basketball coach for the Worcester Generals, the high school. And her son, she had a son, her oldest was Mark Alberts, who was this award-winning basketball player throughout high school and this and that. And she also had a daughter that was named Marcy. And Marcy, I remember, basketball was in their blood. She was this prodigy of being able to play basketball, but not only that, she'd won all these crazy big competitions on foul shooting. I remember that a lot. And Mrs. Alberts, her youngest son, Mason, was born when I was in second grade. I remember that being a thing because my dad, being a baby doctor, gynecologist, I'm not sure if he delivered Mason or not, but there's a strong possibility because during those years, there were only 2 gynecologists in the community, and my dad was one of them, so he delivered a lot of people. But Mrs. Alberts, what a warm heart. She was awesome. But this was the year that I also discovered grades weren't so great. I had some struggling. First grade was pretty smooth. Second grade, got a couple little notes on the report card, and one of them, she had said that I had backtalked a lot. Now, when you're a kid, this is something else I've learned with wisdom, time, and age. When you're a kid, you don't hear it. It doesn't connect that you're sounding negative or that you have kind of a passive-aggressive type vibe to your responses to people and this and that. But when you're a kid, you don't know. I honestly had no idea that I was backtalking. And I can only imagine hearing myself back then if there was, oh my goodness. So it was the first time that I had been given some negative reviews of my behavior in school. But really my grades weren't that bad. In front of me I have a report card from second grade, and I'm seeing a lot of pluses, which their grading scale was what? O equals outstanding progress. Plus indicates commendable progress. S is satisfactory. The check is needs improvement. And U is unsatisfactory. So I had none of those, but a lot of pluses, a couple check marks. So really I didn't do quite as bad as I thought during that year academically. And in that same year, second grade, I also was faced with death. Not in my family, but I had two classmates. Both these guys were friends of mine. One was Buddy Khalil. He'd lived near me, and his father had passed away. He had an illness that was a long thing, and that was sad. That was the first time I'm like, wow, your parents can be gone, and foreshadowing for me. I mean, thinking about what happened to me later in high school, that my mom passed away. I mean, I had no idea. And to think what these young little guys were going through with losing their parent is awful. And then my other friend that same year, Paul Galasco, his father had died suddenly. And they died really close together. And I was friends with both these guys. So it was a lesson that, oh, wow, this does exist. We're not immortal. And even as a little boy, it sank in. I mean, these were people I was close to, the kids. So the idea that, wow, their parents, I couldn't imagine losing my parent at that age. So I remember that. I sprained my thumb. I remember that happened playing tetherball on the playground. Let's talk about that playground. Might as well. That playground, a lot of lessons were learned on that playground. That's something I always tell people about school. You know what? The most important things that you learn in school are not always in that classroom. Lessons learned with dealing with other people, problems, and a lot of lessons were learned on the playground and in the cafeteria and through the hallways. Socializing is so important. I think it's so vital that kids communicate, have friends, and are faced with challenges. It's one thing that's good about school. I'm an advocate of that. I think it's important for these young little people to every day wake up, have to go someplace, go to school, do your thing, come back home, back to your parents, because that lesson that was learned through all those years, they can take through their adulthood. Just a little preaching for you right there about the importance of kids and them being in school and being around other people and going through that experience, because I did, and boy, I'm glad I did. So the playground, our playground that we had at Layton Elementary, could never exist today. Why? Because we had these literally 8 to 10 feet tall metal slides. We had really big, tall swings that would go super high. They had teeter-totters that would go high. But you know what? All those things I just mentioned were all on the cement, especially the slide and the swings. You go to a park now, you're getting mulch, or they take tires and you get these little rubber things the kids can fall so they don't get hurt. Well, we survived. And I remember that playground being on concrete. We used to break dance on that playground. They had Foursquare. I don't know if kids still play that today. It doesn't get much easier than that, but that was hardcore. And we had kickball, again, on the cement, which was fun. I loved kickball. And tetherball, which if you've seen the movie Napoleon Dynamite, he brings it home, man. Watch that movie. That's a funny movie. But there's tetherball at the end of that movie. He's just taking it to town. And I was good at tetherball, but I always stubbed my thumb on that ball. And the one time, I had to leave school early and see my dad's friend, Dr. Logie. And I got a little cast. It was just a sprain, but I had a cast. And live and learn, right? Second grade. And now we're going to venture into third grade, which was probably my favorite grade, without a doubt. And not only that, a lot of things happened in my life in 1982 and 1983. That year, it was a big year for music, movies. Where to begin? My teacher was Mrs. Kuntz. and she was awesome. She had a thing on her chalkboard. For the boys and girls out there who don't know what a chalkboard is, it's this like thing that you write on with chalk. I'm trying to be funny. Simple things in my grade school. We didn't have all the bells and whistles that these schools have today with their teachers have microphones and flat screens that come out of the wall and robots and stuff. No, we had the basics, which I'm grateful for. We learned to read and all that. Not that kids don't today, but third grade, she had a chalkboard. And on it, she had a thing called a chatterbox that she drew up in chalk on the far right-hand side of the board. And I was in this box a lot. She put my name in there a lot. So apparently I like to talk. Imagine that. Years later, I'm doing a podcast talking to the wall. And she put my name in there a lot. So I learned that I must talk a lot. I was a chatterbox, what can I say? But my grades were so-so. And I remember that year my dad had gone to China. Which, now you can go to China. It's all Americanized, pretty smooth. When he went, it wasn't. It was a completely different experience. So for us, we were like, whoa, Dad's taking off and going to China on the other side of the globe, which was just crazy. I remember going to school, and before I would leave, he was calling, and he was going to bed. And I think he went for a couple weeks. He was gone for a while. He went with one of his friends that I'd spoke of just previously, Owen Logie. He was a bone doctor. The two of them set off to go to China. And my dad came back with all these souvenirs, and wow, that must have been quite an experience for him. But he had come to our third grade class and spoke, which looking at my life, and I speak all the time at grade schools nationally. And I always remember that. I remember my dad coming into the classroom. He had a slideshow of photos, and he had spoke to our class. And I thought, how cool is that? That day, I was like, that's my dad, man. Cool. And he'd put on a really good presentation. He was not shy. And I was inspired by that, I suppose. I turned into a motivational speaker talking to all ages, and one of the seeds was planted that day. I remember that. So third grade, 1983, Return of the Jedi came out, and breakdancing. And this time, I really found my voice during that year because I was really engulfed into the arts. I was discovered as a childhood actor during this time. So I did a bunch of the different, pretty prestigious plays, really. And I did the talent show. The talent show. I always looked forward to the talent show. There was something about it. I fell in love with the stage. I was already in my living room, in my basement, and, performing, and I was into magic. I was into puppets. The Muppets were huge when I was a kid. Kids aren't really into puppets anymore as much, but Kermit the Frog, and I got a ventriloquist puppet from J.C. Penney's for Christmas one year. Charlie McCarthy. That was the first time that I really got into puppetry. And I was already in the talent show when I was in first grade. I should have mentioned that. I got in the newspaper for that. Charlie McCarthy and me, the little puppet, ventriloquist doll. And I was good at it. Had this high little voice that I could talk, and I could do ventriloquism. And I got in the newspaper, and in second grade, the next year, I had a different ventriloquist doll, which was Danny. He was a clown. I'd put these little presentations on during the talent show. But third grade, the electric juggler. I spoke about this in a previous podcast. I would break dance and juggle to Herbie Hancock's Rocket. What a great little tune. And I remember that year just thinking, okay, we're on to something, because I really got the audience, and that was a heck of a performance. There are things I did in that I couldn't do to this day, I don't think. I was balancing plates off the top of my nose. I had a big stick that I'd balance on the top of my nose and spin the plate. I was juggling 3 clubs. Not too bad for a little kid back then. I was probably 9 years old. Became the childhood actor. I took dance lessons. I I was entertaining. I discovered Michael Jackson that year. He was big. He did his Motown appearance. And that's how he kind of blew up, and Thriller came out, and that was 83. 83 was a good year just because I found my voice, a lot of self-discovery. Now keep in mind, this was before I found skateboarding, just a couple years before. So up until this time, I was roller skating a lot. Roller skating outside. I was going down hills, and not just the rink. No. So I was roller skating, and I did have a skateboard, but the skateboard I had was the skateboard that everybody had. It was leftover from the mid-70s, the banana boards they were called. Urethane big wheels. They were typically shaped like a surfboard, maybe only like 6 inch, 7 inches, 8 inches wide, maybe by a foot or so long. We would lay on them, we would do Superman dives down the street. So that was all happening. 1983, great teacher. I also remember learning my multiplication tables during that year. And you know what? I mean, it's crazy how life is when you actually sit down and memorize something. Those tables, I remember memorizing 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 3 is 6, and so forth. Had I not taken that evening, or couple evenings, however long it took, not long, to memorize that, to this day, I wouldn't be able to tell you that 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 5 is 20. It's because of memorizing that during that time period. And that stuck with me. I always remembered that. Mrs. Kuntz, who I still communicate with and see once in a while, she's very kind on Facebook. She likes my stuff, and that's one cool thing about social media now. We can keep in touch with so many different walks of life, and it's neat that something like that to reconnect with a teacher. I mean, it's a lifetime ago. But they remembered me, and that's always flattering. And she was one of those teachers that I'll never forget. She has a warm heart, big smile. Her son was a year older than me. I remember him as well. Oh, a quick story that I just thought of. Valentine's Day, which as a kid is a big deal. I mean, wow. You get to express yourself to another person in that way. I mean, yeah, you're giving these little cards to everybody, but I had crushes. Now, on the playground, a lot of my peers were, oh, girls have cooties, that whole thing. I never experienced that, ever. At that age, I had a lot of crushes, and I was just, had my crushes. I was girl crazy. And I remember Valentine's Day that year that had a couple people that I had my eye on, but man, I went the extra mile. I remember really putting my heart and brain into that little card that you would give them. You know, normally it was, I don't know, Snoopy cards or something you'd buy at the store, and Star Wars maybe. But I remember really putting a lot into that. And I developed a bit of a heart during that time period. So Valentine's Day. Now we're going into 4th grade. Mrs. Giesler. I remember this year very well. She was an interesting lady. She was very proper, very put together, very almost dressed 1960s-ish. And 4th grade. What was sad is years later, Mrs. Giesler died of cancer. I remember hearing that and thinking, oh, my mom had died from cancer, so I could relate now and thinking, that's so unfortunate. And in front of Layton, they planted a memorial tree, a little tree that's probably much bigger now. I'll have to check that out, in her honor. So 4th grade, remember that. I developed some new friendships, and I was growing up. But I was still doing a lot of theater during this time. To the point where I remember having to leave class, do a production somewhere. They put makeup on me and everything. Yeah, it was legit. And I would come back to class by the end of the day or something, and I'd still have this makeup on, and kids were looking at me like, whoa, what? I'd explain, hey, yeah, doing the whole acting thing. And it was a neat lesson for me because it taught me to be different, and I liked being different. I embraced it. Yes, I did the traditional sports. During the summers, during these years, I did basketball, baseball, but I was doing something completely different than my peers, and acting was one of those things. Not only that, they didn't have a talent show that year. And for me, the talent show, I mean, that is the one thing that I looked forward to every single year. Well, they started to do it every other year. So, luckily, grade 1, 2, and 3 had a talent show, but no 4th grade. So I was shining other places on the stage, just not at Layton. And something really heavy happened that year. My life story, let's see. My dad found out that my mom had cancer that year, and he had told me, and this whole story, he told me, just put me aside, and I was in shock. I mean, I really didn't believe it, but so I kind of went into autopilot, and I was just, my little system at that time, 4th grade, I just wasn't really accepting it. It just kind of, okay, yeah, the sky is blue, I like Star Wars, I can ride a bike, and my mom has cancer. Like, is she gonna die? I was confused. And even looking back, wow, all the stuff that my family was doing. I mean, my mom, nothing stopped her. She did so much in the community. That year, she was the president of Junior Women's Club. She won this prestigious citizen award in the community, and a bunch of other stuff. And so I was dealing with that. People were coming by and bringing food, and it was strange. Just, I mean, really, the only people that knew, though, were just immediate family and friends, and that was it. And, but it was coming out in strange ways, how I was kind of grieving with it, or dealing with it. I would cry out of nowhere in school, and just privately, something would come over me, and I didn't know where it was coming from. And looking back as an adult, I know that was a lot of the anxiety of that. That's where it was happening. And I mean, I was already a homebody, but anytime my parents sent me away, I would get really homesick. And I mean, even Christmas break, I remember excited about Christmas break. Who's not? But the week would go by, and then when I'd go back that night before, I mean, I was almost in tears. I was just, whoa, it was heavy. It was a lot on my system to go back to school. The next day, I would try not to cry because I was thinking, oh, wow. I remember going to the basketball game with my dad on Christmas break, and just little things like that would set me off. And one time, I had an outburst. It just happened. And Mrs. Giesler, to her credit, she knew, I didn't know this at the time, but she knew that my mom had cancer. My parents had talked to her, maybe during one of their parent-teacher conferences or something. But she took me into this little closet next door outside of the classroom when I was crying. And she's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I told her. And she goes, is it your mom? And I was like, yeah, I think that's it. It's too much on my system. And she was so comforting about that. And the empathy and compassion and sympathy that she had for that says a lot about her character. And what's just so sad is that she ended up dying of cancer years later. And the warmth that she gave me, and that she showed me her heart, and wow, I remember that. And that stuck with me, and it's just so sad that she had passed away also. And then we have 5th grade, Mr. McDowell. Noel McDowell was his name, is his name. I still see him. He still looks exactly the same. Now, Mr. McDowell was unique because he was my neighbor. We're talking my neighbor, right next to me. So he saw all the shenanigans that went on in that circle on Avalon with my neighborhood friends, and he would often talk about it in class. He was funny. He was a unique guy. He was quiet, and he had a snap. I can't even do it that loud. This guy had a snap that you could hear from the mountaintops. I mean, he didn't have to say a word. If he wanted you quiet or wanted something, boom, he would snap at you. And that was his signature thing. He didn't spank, he didn't hit, he snapped. He would point his finger when he did it. But he was a great guy. He is a great guy. He follows my career, which is really cool. He reads my books and stuff. I run into him and shakes my hand, and what a great guy. I mean, but he helped me a lot. How did he help me? Well, this was the year that my grades really started to kind of tank. I mean, I just didn't pay attention to school. I was so into my music stuff and my doing all these theater productions and what have you. And I wasn't getting good grades. We would get U's, they were called, for unsatisfactory. Now they have this whole complex teaching, grading scale, whatever. It was pretty basic back then. But looking at this report card from Mr. McDowell in 5th grade, I mean, I really wasn't doing quite as bad as I thought, at least in the beginning. Looking at this, he had wrote some comments that are kind of worth reading. Let me check this out. Doug is completing his work most of the time. His study habits are good. He's a hard worker. He is participating in class discussions, and his comments are thoughtful and interesting. He is well-mannered and helpful. He remembers to do polite things. Doug's composition skills are improving. He's doing more outside reading, and he is off to a good start in the math unit of fractions. Doug volunteers often. He takes a keen interest in all work and is most agreeable and a willing worker. He reads smoothly with expression. He plans and uses his time well. Doug worked hard on his project for the Young Authors Conference. His work demonstrated careful planning, organization, and ability to follow through. Well, that doesn't sound too much like a failing student, but I did have the fear towards the end of the year of not passing if it wasn't for him putting his heart into helping me out. And what did he do? He said, look, I know you can write. We used to have to do these essays. They called them themes at the time. You know, they'd be like 4 pages long or whatever. And he said, look, to get these grades up, you have to write so many amount of themes. And I thought, you know what? I think I can do that. Okay, let's do this. And I'm talking like 50 or so. They are sitting here, a great amount of them, right beside me. I have a pile long of handwritten essays, themes that I wrote. Each one would be a different topic. I'll look at it in a second. I'm kind of nervous to go through those. But they were thick. I mean, I kind of prided myself on that looking back. It wasn't like 2 pages. I mean, it would be like 20 pages for one or something. I love to write. I didn't like to edit. I wasn't into that. Boy, how times have changed. I don't mind writing, but not crazy about editing or doing all that stuff. How I became a published author, hey, I didn't really realize that would happen, but it started then. That year I was writing a lot. And I think he knew that I had a spark. I was, I guess, bright for that age, and he saw that, and I passed that grade, thank goodness. But I know it's from those themes and those essays that I did way back during that year. And a lot of memories of 5th grade. And yeah, he would say funny things because he would see me doing things like roller skating down the hill. It was a big hill. These driveways were in a cul-de-sac, but they looked like a ski resort. And I would go down these hills on my roller skates. It looked like I was skiing or something. And there was a basketball hoop in front of our house. So I would go down the hill crazy fast. And these were old roller skates, not cool urethane. They were like metal wheels. And I would shoot a hoop and I'd go back up the hill. And he would mention this to the students. He's like, oh, I saw Doug yesterday. Nice basket. And he'd make these comments that were endearing and just kind of funny. And so really good memories of that year with that. Grades, not so much, but I made it through it. It was kind of cool that way because my self-esteem built with my writing. And in 5th grade, I remember being introduced to the personal computer. We had, I believe they were just Apple IIe's. I think we had 2 of them in the classroom. This belongs in my 80s podcast. I did a couple episodes back. Now these computers, wow, how times have changed. But at the time it was kind of wild. We had Ataris and stuff like that at home, but to work with the computer was a whole different thing at the school. The main thing they taught us was called Logo. I don't know if anybody out there remembers logo, but it was a little triangle that you would get to draw, basically. So if you wanted to do a square, you'd have to program it. You'd be like F20, so it'd go 20 spaces. To make it go right, RT90, and it would do that, and you'd finish the process. You'd have to type, just to make a simple square or triangle or whatever. And then you could program it to do the color. I mean, how basic is this? But looking back, it's kind of funny. We bought a home computer around that time called the Apple IIc, which was kind of fun. I got to learn to program, and I was a little bit nerdy about it. I enjoyed it. It was a green screen. I remember that. It was black and green, and that's it. But it was fun because I could figure out how to program stuff. My brother and I made our own little movies, and I would have titles, so I'd film the screen with our VHS recorder. Anyhow, so we had some computers, and we did logo, and usually everything was education-based. What was really kind of hysterical was the printer. You would always hear, even during class, you'd hear this noise in the back if the teacher was printing out anything. You would hear this, and this would go on for 10 minutes per page. It was really loud like that. It had these little circles that would spin it through. And how times have changed. Hey, let me see. Like I said, I have a pile of stuff here from those years. I didn't myself save these items. I didn't know that my parents were keeping them. And after, of course, when I moved out of my house when I was 18 and my mom passed away and all that happened, I acquired a lot of this stuff, and I'm glad I held on to it. And it's been kind of buried, really, and to dig it back up, I haven't seen this stuff in years, so I'm really in that time machine of Layton Elementary right now, and we'll check out some of that stuff in a little bit, just for fun. Why not? Nostalgia. But going to 6th grade next. 6th grade, big year. The toughest year, without a doubt, for me. It just was. Oh, where do I begin on 6th grade? Mr. Pierman. Terry Pierman. Now, Terry was tall, but he's still tall, so he was a big guy. Mr. Pierman was cool. Why was he cool? Just because he was. There's certain people on the planet that have that spark, and as a teacher, he had that spark where he could connect students, and he wasn't so far removed, and he spoke our language. But I was getting really bad grades. I can't sugarcoat that. I mean, I didn't do great in 5th grade, but 6th grade, I just did not care. The rebellious spark in me was starting to grow that year. Anything that involved authority or do this, do that, I was having an issue with. Some of it just seemed involuntary at the time. Boy, if I could go back and change that behavior, I definitely would. What was I thinking? And outside on the playground, they had a rail that you could sit on. And it was really long. It went along the perimeter of the building. And, well, the bad kids, like a detention, would get sat on the rail. You'd have to sit on the rail during recess if you got in trouble. Well, my butt got acquainted with that hard, cold, black rail. A lot. It's embarrassing. But I was always in trouble. Not always, but more often than not. I was on that rail during a recess. And funny thing is, years later, I would end up skating on that rail and board sliding and grinding that rail. So it lived on. I wasn't just sitting on it. Anyways, I would backtalk, and I think I drove him crazy. I feel awful. And we've had a reunion since then. It happened in Best Buy, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I was walking into the store, and this gentleman's like, "Doug!" I knew right away who it was because he didn't look much different. And he had this head shake he was doing. He shook my hand, and he was just all about my skating. That, to me, was just wild. I did not expect that he knew everything that was going on, and he was saying how proud he was of me. I mean, with my own family, I really haven't got that much reassurance through the years at all. I mean, my dad once in a while thank goodness he'll say this or that. But to have Mr. Pearman come up to me, a mentor, a role model, and say the things he said with such heart was flattering, and it felt good. He even said, "I love you." He said, "I love you." And I'm like, "Oh, I love you too, man." It was cool. And he had asked about my dad. People always ask about my dad. "How's your dad doing?" My dad was popular in the community. At the time, I didn't really realize it until years later when people always ask, they'll ask, how I'm doing. But boy, they want to know how my dad's doing. I always say he's doing well. He's this old. This is going on. He's there. He's here. But Terry was a great guy. And I somehow made it again through 6th grade. I have no idea. It was just on the cusp there, because I think they just wanted to get rid of me or something. No. Junior high was coming, so I had to get out of 6th grade, and I'm glad I did. I mean, leaving Layton was heavy. I mean, it was a lot of years to look back that was sentimental about the whole thing. I was glad to get out, though. That's one thing I learned through grade school, and I tell kids even to this day, every year you have new challenges, but in a lot of ways it gets easier because you have more freedom. Now, middle school starts at like 5th grade now. I think they've changed it all around, junior high, middle school. But for me, 6th grade was the end of grade school. And what they had tried to implement during my 6th grade year was switching classes. So we did have like kind of 2 teachers we'd bounce against. Maybe half the day you would go to one teacher, and then the other half you'd go to the other teacher. Mrs. Schwenk was the other teacher. But the primary teacher I had was Mr. Pearman that year. Good memories. Another important room at Layton was the library. The librarian's name was Mrs. Petch. I remember her. She always had these glasses and white hair. Went to the library a lot. I grew up in a generation that read a lot. Not that today's doesn't, but I think kids today don't read quite as much as we did for a number of reasons. Of course, I grew up learning cursive and the library. I remember getting magazines like 321 Contact, Sesame Street was in there, and some books. I mean, we had encyclopedias. Now, for those listening that have no idea what an encyclopedia is, it's a large number of books. Very heavy. But it was the Google of the day. If you wanted to look up something on tigers, you would grab the volume that was titled T, get the T, grab it, open the book. They were always heavy. Flip through the pages, find tigers. There'd be maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs that you would get your information from. Today, of course, a couple clicks on the iPhone, laptop, whatever, and boom, information highway. Much faster now than then. And we also had the card catalog. If I wanted to look up a book, for those listening again that don't know what a card catalog is, well, talk about something that took up a lot of space. Big cabinets, they would come out. If you ever watched the movie Ghostbusters, the very beginning of Ghostbusters, that's card catalogs. These pages start shooting out of the cabinets, and those are card catalogs. And they would be really thick. You would flip through whatever you're looking for. So if you're looking for something on, let's say, frogs. Well, okay. Let's see here. Nonfiction. Everything was categorized, biography, what have you. Nonfiction, pull it out, do the alphabet, F, 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 R, frogs. You lift it up, and you'd have a number, like 00-125B7. And then you'd have to locate that book. Much easier now, but it's all on computer, of course. I'm from that generation. Old school. Another valuable room in that building was, of course, the cafeteria, which was also the gymnasium and had the old school layout that the stage would be right above there with the curtain and all that jazz. Cafeteria, sometimes I would pack my lunch, sometimes I wouldn't. When I packed my lunch, I had this awesome Fame lunchbox from the TV show Fame, and I still have it. Really unique. Had the little thermos with Leroy dancing up on it. So that was always a treat to bring your own little lunch. Of course, I'll never forget going to that cafeteria and eating the food, which actually wasn't terrible at the time. There were these green plastic trays, and you'd have a little card that you'd pay with, and you'd get your food, typical meals. And I remember Mrs. Shy. I have to mention her. She was the lunch lady, I guess you could say. And they let us, I think it was by the time you were maybe in 6th grade, you could work in the cafeteria at lunch, which was always kind of cool because you could get out of class a little earlier before lunch. And you would help clean the dishes, and you would put the little tater tots or whatever on these trays. And she was a wonderful lady. I ran into her a few years back at a book signing I was doing, and she was there. She came up to my table and remembered me, and she looked exactly the same. She was a real short lady, but what a warm heart. Unfortunately, she had passed away just a couple years ago, and her name was Gloria Shy, and she had a great hug. I remember that. And it was so fun to talk to her when I ran into her the last time, because we talked all about Layton and how wonderful it was and how fortunate we were to be there at that school. I did joke with her though, because I remember her yelling at me. I was a little rebellious boy, and one time she said, "You know, Doug, you like to be the class clown." She said it like that, and I was like, oh, what can I come up with in return? And I said, "Yeah, you like to be the clown cook." So we had a good chuckle about that. Still remember that. But so that's the cafeteria. We also had, they were like prison guards. It's 2 women. One was Mrs. Gibbons, and the other was Mrs. Janitis. And they were essentially the police of the cafeteria. They had the whistle, and I'll never forget, they would announce when it was time for recess or what have you, and they were always very authoritarian. Oh my. Mrs. Gibbons, her son, Ryan, was a few years older than me, but he was in my play I was in, Tom Sawyer, when I played Tom, one of my first big breaks as a kid. Her son was also a childhood actor, so we had that in common. But anyhow, I remember them. I remember their voices very well, and that was the cafeteria. Now, how did I get to school? Well, for the most part, I took the bus every morning, which now, buses, it's like a limo service. They're going to go door to door, and signs are going to come out so the traffic freezes, which is great. But in my day, we would have to walk all the way down the street, and it was a big, long street, and freeze our butts off by the tree, and that's where we waited for the school bus. It wasn't door to door. I remember Phil, that was his name. Not sure of his last name, but he was the bus driver I had for the most part. And the days I would walk home, it was a good little walk. Now, I can't imagine. It's a different world, different time. Back then, let's say when I was 7 years old, to walk all that way by myself, completely alone, go through the college parking lot and go through some neighborhoods, and it was a little jaunt, but I did a lot of thinking, and I remember those days really well, walking home from school. Oh, this is such a trip down memory lane. I'm right now looking at everything that's in front of me. I have this old Michael Jackson Thriller folder from back then. Probably got that in '83 after the album came out. And just a bunch of stuff. Got a lot of little art awards, which are kind of fun. And I have some of the books I did for this program they called the Young Authors Program that they did every year. I think that started in 4th grade or so, which was cool. You'd write your own story, and you'd get the cover laminated, and it's really cool for me to look at it now because I've written books that have been published, and I was kind of impressed on my layout for some of these books. I did the whole copyright thing and had a little logo and drew little this and that. Even came up with my own little company. It was like Michael Jackson Metropolitan Publishing, something along those lines. Wow. And also, I have some really neat things. I have some programs from the shows that we did while in grade school. We did the normal Christmas programs and this and that. But my mom she was involved in this, which is just awesome. Looking at this, I see her name as the director. We did something called Layton Star Search. I have the actual program in front of me. There's great memories of this. What's really unique is opening this program up. I had no idea my mom's handwriting is in here, and there's all these little notes because she was the director for that production, and she had worked with Joe Walter, her good friend. My brother is also in the credits as doing the sound. Look at that. Directors Joe Walter and Becky Brown. How cool. So they put this program on, kind of a variety show. And yeah, she played, looking at this, she played piano for a lot of the school programs, which was always cool to have her there. And taking this back to my life and everything, we think about our grade school years, and man, they're important. They carry a lot of weight. I'm looking at this stuff, I'm looking at my writings, and it had a lot to do with who I became as an adult, especially my time on the stage at the talent shows. That's where I found my spotlight, and then I found my writing through that. I found my voice at a really young age, and it's just neat to look back on that. And it was a sentimental journey for me, and for those who've been to Layton and did your time, I'm sure you can relate to some of this. And every grade had 2 teachers, so they have their memories of somebody maybe that I didn't have as a teacher, and it was always the lottery on which teacher you would get. Although I have my suspicions about 5th grade with Mr. McDowell, because he had taught my brother and everybody in that neighborhood. So come 5th grade, I was listed right there for Mr. McDowell. But again, each grade had 2 teachers. So people that went to that school might have different memories from different teachers and what have you. But the school was special. I was really fortunate to go through it, and it helped develop who I became. I mean, I changed a lot during junior high and high school. Who doesn't? It's normal. But seeds were planted at Layton Elementary many, many years ago. I spent 7 years at that school, kindergarten through 6th grade. And I don't remember all the classroom things like learning this or that, but what I remember is my relationship with the teachers, which was very important, and my friends, without a doubt. Being around so many diverse types of kids and getting to know them and their parents, and like I said earlier, it's the lessons that happen in school that are really, really the most important are the ones that are sometimes not in the curriculum of class. Math is important, reading is important, but learning how to get along with different people is important. Working with teachers, other adults, that's important. And that's what I get out of all those years. I was very lucky that each teacher has had their own strengths and helped me become who I became. And teachers have a lot of power, and that's just me. I think about all the students that have gone through Layton, and all the teachers that helped form and shape the lives of these young people. So my hat's off to the teachers, and of course the principals. We can't forget them. The first principal I had from kindergarten through 1st grade was Mrs. Severo. She moved, so by 2nd grade I had Mrs. Roman. And I believe around 4th grade, Mr. Druard became the principal, and I remember him the most. I still see him around. That's what's neat, being in my hometown, is a lot of these people are still around. And of course they've gotten older, but guess what? So have I. But I still think when you see those teachers, they still see it as that little kid. And that's one of the things about life. I mean, parents are like that. My dad's in his late 70s, but there's parts of him that still think I'm 9 years old. And that's normal. That's life. I talk a lot about Layton in my books I've written, especially my biography, Bliss of the Unwind, My Life Beyond the Board. You can check that out, by the way, at www.dougbrown.org, my website. So, we went to Layton Elementary today. Thank you for joining me on this journey. It was very sentimental. And until next time, Doug Brown here, signing off for Method Airwaves. Thank you, everybody that's been listening and checking in. I really do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Till next time, folks. See you later.